Everybody knows about test number 4, which is next Sunday night. That's going to be the hardest test you've ever taken in your entire lifetime. Have you guys heard that before? We'll start at 5 o'clock, just as I've mentioned several times now. For those of you who cannot make it, no harm, no foul. You can only be here at 5:30, you can only be here at 5:30. We're going to have everybody will be able to go to 7:30, so there should be plenty of time for the test. I encourage you to look and study at your pressure volume homework assignment. Same thing on the homework assignment that involved a variety of different calculations. As I said, I mean, really, the objective of all of that is to make sure that you're up to speed on potential test questions and get you prepared for that. And then what we're going to do tonight, depending upon how long lecture lasts, if I take up the entire time, then for lab tonight, for those of you interested, we'll do some calculations up in lab related to calculating oxygen uptake, using gas exchange measurements, which would be at the mouth, versus oxygen uptake using the Fick principle. And then also there was a question of whether we could go with some of the homework assignment problems, and the answer to that is sure. And then the learning objectives have been posted, and I need to come back up to item B. So the invitation for the Zoom call on Saturday morning is posted under the announcements section. So you should see the invitation there. And as I've said all throughout the semester, to me, the smartest way to approach this is to have everything memorized well in advance. So just as a kind of a rule of thumb, I would say you should have everything memorized by Friday. That gives you the headroom to kind of play with the stuff in your mind. It gives you the opportunity and the time to go and take a look at things related to pressure volume diagrams, the cardiac cycle, making sure you understand where everything belongs, EKGs, all the things we covered. All right, so that's it. And the other thing I just want to emphasize to you is that something that I stated at the very beginning of this course, and I'll just emphasize it tonight, put the punctuation mark on it, is that if you had to teach one biological story as it relates to human beings, that story, I'm hoping, would be the process by which oxygen moves from the air that we breathe into the mitochondria. That would be the story. We're taking lots of lessons learned throughout the semester, and we're putting it into these algorithms. And the algorithms that I'm presenting to you are the punctuation mark in terms of what determines the rate or the ability of the system to deliver oxygen to the cells of the body. That's it. And this algorithm, as I told you the other night, for those of you who go on PA school, nurse practitioner school, nursing school, farm school, all of this is incredibly relevant, all of it. And what's the main cause of death in the United States? Cardiovascular disease. That's it. When I say that, you guys go, oh, Framingham study. 3 primary risk factors for the development of heart disease: smoking, hypertension. That's one of the reasons why we care about high blood pressure. And then hypercholesterolemia. All right, so Monday night we covered topics that were related to the issues that determine the glomerular filtration rate. And that's really important because at the end of the day, we need some type of way of cleansing the blood. More importantly, the plasma. And so there's got to be this driving force, and this driving force is the balance between PCAP, PBC, and PICAP. That's the driving force. Reabsorption rate. We're going to change this, and one of the points that I tried to stress to you the other night, and this is a really kind of fundamental story, is the excretion of everything. Different way to think about it, the reabsorption of everything is dependent upon this guy right here. But for everything that we talk about, you could come along and change that subscript and supplement that with whatever you're interested in. For instance, glucose or potassium. Anybody gonna tell me why we're so interested in potassium? Some of you asked me this the other night. Why is potassium so darn important? Anybody, don't be bashful.
Affect your heart.
Huh?
Affect the way your heart beats.
Maybe, but there's something more fundamental than that.
Does it increase the excitability of cells?
Because it affects, it determines the excitability of cells, right? So when potassium levels are high, the excitability is high. That makes you more susceptible to arrhythmias. On the other hand, if potassium levels are low, then people have, well, first of all, if they're low, the resting membrane potential is further from threshold. That means that you need much larger stimuli to get the threshold. And so people who have low potassium come in complaining of weakness. Why? Because they can't excite their muscle cells because they're too far from threshold. They complain of being lethargic. The neurons in the brain aren't communicating and working properly. So potassium, 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 and that's been with us really since we started talking about membrane potentials. Also, on Monday night, we began to talk about the reabsorption of sodium. I talked about the reabsorption of glucose. Not going to talk about the reabsorption of hydrogen ions, but we will talk about the reabsorption of sodium, potassium, and chloride ions. And then from there, we're going to get into the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone story. And again, if you recall, Monday night, I just tried to emphasize that within any discipline of physiology, there are these stories that are fundamental stories of physiology. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone story is one of those as it pertains to renal physiology. After I get done with that, then we're going to talk about diuretics. What are diuretics? Well, first of all, what is diuresis? And hopefully all of you remember that on Monday night I mentioned that diuresis simply means increased production of urine. So what do diuretics do? Diuretics are a way of trying to manipulate the kidney so that it ends up excreting more urine. Who cares? Big deal. It is a big deal because the kidneys determine cardiac performance by acting on blood volume and filling pressure. And I'll come back and we're going to connect these diagrams together to one another, but always, please remember, 5 main functions of kidneys. One of those is control blood volume. And in controlling blood volume, we're controlling cardiac performance, and in controlling that, we're really controlling mean arterial pressure. So we're going to talk about several different classes of diuretics, and I know all of you are really excited about this. You get to add this to your little collection of drugs. So tonight you're going to learn about loop diuretics, and one of these is known as furosemide. A different name for furosemide is very well known clinically is Lasix. And Lasix is in the top 100 World Health Organization drugs. Thiazides. There's a drug called hydrochlorothiazide, HCT. Thiazides, they're probably in the top 30 of the World Health Organization drugs. They are a frontline drug for treating hypertension. There's so-called potassium-sparing diuretics. Why the heck would I put that up there? Because we don't want to end up excreting a lot of potassium and losing or reducing our potassium concentration levels. And then there's ACE inhibitors. And ACE inhibitors stand for angiotensin converting enzyme. And these, again, are frontline drugs. Things like captopril, benazepril, very, very common ACE inhibitors. Okay, that's it. So Monday night we talked about reabsorption at the proximal tubule level. Remember that reabsorption at the proximal tubule accounts for 60% of the reabsorption. So the proximal tubule is the main player in the story. And as I mentioned to you, within the membrane of these tubular epithelial cells, there are sodium ion channels that allow sodium to move from an area of high concentration, which is within the lumen of the proximal tubule, into the cell, and from the cell, then that gets pumped out into the interstitial space, causing the concentration sodium here to be greater than the concentration sodium here. So sodium moves into the peritubular capillary. And one of the things that all of you should be telling me is that wherever sodium goes, water is falling right along with it. Also, talk to you about the reabsorption of glucose. And to me, this is just one of the amazing stories of all physiology. It's that every day of your life, your kidneys are reabsorbing 1 mole of glucose, approximately 1 mole. Sit there and think about this. That is this incredible number of individual molecules of glucose that somehow gets put back into the circulatory system. To me, that's mind-boggling. And it does that with incredible fidelity, such that none of you are losing sugar molecules in your urine. However, the transport mechanism that's responsible for the reabsorption of glucose is the sodium glucose transporter, so-called SGLT. And all of you learned about these earlier. You know that this is a form of carrier-mediated transport. More specifically, what? There's primary active transport, and then there's secondary active transport. And this is a very important example of secondary active transport. Whenever we're talking about carrier-mediated transport, you're going to tell me there's 3 fundamental properties: specificity, competition, and, for this story, very importantly, saturation. And so when we saturate, if our glucose levels in the blood are high enough, so what you need to appreciate is that the concentration of glucose in the proximal tubule is dictated by the concentration of glucose in the blood, right? Because all the glucose is getting filtered. These holes, these fenestrations, allow everything to pass through that's in the plasma in exactly the same proportion that we find in the plasma. So if the concentration of glucose here is 100 milligrams per 100 mLs of blood, our concentration over here will be 100 milligrams per 100 milliliters. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to come along, we're going to create a graph that reflects the filtration, the reabsorption, and the excretion of glucose. And so on this curve, on the x-axis, we're going to put the concentration of glucose. And this is going to be in units of milligrams per 100 milliliters. And I'm going to go in increments of 100. So we'll start out at 0. Here's 100, 200, 300, and yeah, that's about right, 400. Then we're going to do the same thing on the x-axis. So we got 0, 100, 200, 300, and 400. And over here, we're actually going to plot 3 different events. So in black, we're going to do the filtration rate. So black is going to be filtration rate. And this is going to be milligrams per minute. So everything that I'm going to describe over here on this axis is going to be in units of milligrams per minute. And if you recall, the other night we did do a calculation here. So if the concentration is 100 milligrams per 100 mLs, and the GFR is 100 milliliters per minute, then by definition, the filtration rate is 100 milligrams per minute. Everybody with me on that or not? So we got a filtration rate of 100 milliliters per minute times 100 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters. We cancel out milliliters and milliliters, and this then tells us that, in this case, talking about filtration rate, that the filtration rate would be 100 milligrams per minute. What do you think? Any questions about that? Confusion? So, Stephen, here we go. Test question for you. I know you're going to get this one right. Guaranteed. If the concentration of glucose in the blood is 0 milligrams per minute, what's the filtration rate of glucose?
0 milligrams.
It is 0. That's exactly right. Amanda, if the concentration of glucose in the blood is 100 milligrams per 100 milliliters, then what will the filtration rate be? Wow, she did so well on that one. She gets to go to the bonus round. All of you should have got that one right because the calculation's right up there on the board. Amanda, if the concentration of glucose is 200 milligrams per 100 mLs, what's the filtration rate for glucose?
200
It is, that's right. If the concentration of glucose in the blood is 300 milligrams per 100 mLs, then by definition, the filtration rate is 300 milligrams per minute. And of course, for 400 milligrams per 100 mLs, the filtration rate will be 400 milligrams per minute. So our black line represents filtration rate. Luis, you're up to bat on this next one. This next one, we're going to talk about the reabsorption rate, and that's going to be in green. If the concentration of glucose in the blood is 0 milligrams per 100 mLs, you're going to tell us that the reabsorption rate is going to be 0 milligrams per minute, correct? Luis?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. So here's the hypothetical. The concentration here is 0 milligrams per 100 mLs. What will the reabsorption rate be?
0.
If the concentration of glucose is 100 milligrams per 100 mLs, what do you think the reabsorption rate for glucose will be? 100 what?
Milligrams per minute.
Okay. Ms. Lippin, is that the right answer?
I don't know.
Don't know? Okay.
I know it isn't.
Huh?
I know it's not the right answer.
Is that the right answer?
Mm,
She said yes.
What is the right answer?
That's what she said.
Oh.
No, I haven't said anything yet. What did you say, Zane? 99. I would say that her qualified yes is the right answer. Because I already told you that every day you're filtering almost a mole of glucose and you're putting it all back in the blood. And what's the concentration? What's our textbook value for the concentration of glucose? It's 100 milligrams per 100 mLs, right? So yeah, most definitely, that's true. Luis, if the concentration is 200 milligrams per 100 mLs, what's the reabsorption rate of glucose?
100.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? What do you think it is? She says 200, which by definition, that answer is wrong, because there's no units with it, right? What are your units? 200 milligrams per minute. That's the exact right answer right there. Luis.
300.
Not so fast. If the concentration of glucose in the blood is 250 milligrams per 100 mLs, what do you think the reabsorption rate is?
250 milligrams per minute.
That would be correct. Correct. Coming back to you.
300 milligrams per minute.
I'm going to say, no, that's not right. I'm going to say it's 250 milligrams per minute. Louise, if the concentration of glucose in the blood is 400 milligrams per minute, what's the reabsorption rate of glucose?
250
It's in.
Why?
milligrams per minute.
Why?
Is that the
What can you tell me about membrane transport that would make your answer?
saturation?
That's right, exactly. Now, to me, here's some really, really important information. Donna, you're up to bat on this one. If I'm spilling sugar in my urine, by definition, you know that the concentration of glucose in my blood has to exceed a value of what?
100%.
No, there's no percent over there.
250 milligrams per minute.
That's exactly right, yeah? Because up until 250 milligrams per 100 mLs, I'm reabsorbing everything. But now, if I'm spilling sugar in my urine, by definition, you know that my blood glucose levels have exceeded 250 milligrams per 100 mLs. That's pretty damn important clinical information right there, is it not? I think it is. It's not like they're at 125 or 175 or 195. You know by definition that they've saturated all of their glucose transporters, their sodium glucose transporters, and that occurs right around about 250 milligrams per 100 mLs. That's pretty cool information. All right, we're going to do the excretion rate. Ms. Simron, if the concentration of glucose in the blood is 100 milligrams per 100 mLs, what's the excretion rate of glucose?
0.
It is 0, that's right. If the concentration is 200 milligrams per 100 mLs of blood, the excretion rate is
0.
2 thumbs up. You're going to tell us that if the concentration of glucose in the blood is 250 milligrams per 100 mLs, you're going to say that the excretion rate is
0.
fantastic. Somehow I didn't make my curve right. If the concentration of glucose is 300 milligrams per 100 mLs, then the excretion rate is going to be 50 is the right answer. If the concentration of glucose is 400 milligrams, you're going to tell us that the excretion rate is
150.
fantastic, excellent. There we go. Okay, let me just stop there for a moment. Any questions about that? Confusion? Don't be bashful, speak up. If you don't get it, you don't get it. No harm, no foul. Yes, sir.
There was saturation at the SGLT, is that correct? That's caused, or that's because of the saturation of the SGLT protein?
Correct. That's exactly right. And also remember, so this could be a test question. I'm probably not going to ask it, but would there be an osmotic effect related to urine production if the blood glucose levels of this individual was at 175 milligrams per 100 mLs? Mr. Zane says
Yes.
no. Right? The question I'm asking, is there an osmotic effect where glucose is getting past the proximal tubule and taking urine with it and causing increase in diuresis? And the answer is no. At 200 milligrams per 100 ml, would there be an osmotic effect of glucose on diuresis? And the answer is no. At 250, would there be an osmotic effect? No. So again, the point is that this is clinical history. This is something that I mentioned to you, is that, yeah, we live in this age where we can do all these fantastic tests on people, but you want to connect their medical history with that data. And so part of the medical history is you sit there and say what I mentioned to you the other night, or the other night is, how frequently do you have to go to the bathroom at night? And for all of you in here, it's probably a 0 or once. But for a diabetic, it could be 3, 4, 5 times a night. 5 times a night. That seems pretty extreme to me. And that's another clue. That's one of these pieces of evidence that you use to build what's called a differential diagnosis. And to me, this is, I guess, part of the fun, part of the magic, part of the art of being a good clinician, and that is that you learn how to be like a detective. The patient's there and they're telling you something's wrong with them. Or maybe you're telling them there's something wrong with them. And you're going to start asking them what's going on. Okay. Well, one thing you should have in your notes is that the majority of reabsorption occurs at the level of the proximal tubule. However, within the thick ascending loop of Henle, there's a very important transporter. And this transporter, this is a co-transporter. A co-transporter just simply means that more than one ion is being transported at the same time. So this is a so-called sodium, potassium, chloride co-transporter. So sodium ions, potassium ions, let me redo this. Sticking with my color code. And potassium ions. Are all being transported by the same membrane protein. So there's this sodium, potassium, chloride co-transporter. It's a protein that's transporting all three of these ions. it turns out that, so that's takes care of the thick ascending loop of Henle. So again, in our diagram, our base diagram, we've got 60% reabsorption occurring at the proximal tubule. We've got 20% occurring at the thick ascending loop of Henle. That's due to the presence of these sodium potassium chloride cotransporters. At the distal tubule, we've got cells that have sodium ion channels in them. And the story here would be identical to the story that I presented the other night, where I talked about the sodium ion channel. Sodium is just simply moving from an area of high concentration, which is in the lumen of the distal tubule, into the cell where the concentration of sodium is lower. Then sodium gets pumped out into the interstitial space using the sodium potassium ATPase pump. That then diffuses into the circulation. What's following sodium? All of you gonna sit there and say, water. By the way, I'm just gonna come over here, I'm just gonna put H2O, and I'm just gonna show H2O flowing into the peritubular capillary, and you're gonna say that that's due to the osmotic effect of sodium moving from the lumen of the proximal tubule, then into the cells, and then into the peritubular capillary following sodium. Same thing is true here. And then there's another type of sodium ion channel. And I'm showing this further down the length of the proximal tubule, but don't interpret it that way. Okay. Let me just rewrite that equation here. So we've got excretion rate of substance X is equal to the filtration rate of substance X minus the reabsorption rate of X. And the filtration rate of anything, as I already had written up here, is dependent upon PCAP, PVC, and pike out. Here's what we're gonna do now, is we're gonna come along, we're gonna get rid of the wild card, in other words, X. And we're gonna put Na there for sodium. And now, I'm going to introduce you to the renal baroreceptor. So, located in the walls of the afferent arterioles are these so-called renal baroreceptors. So make sure that you label this as the afferent arteriole. Within the walls of the afferent arterioles are these cells, and these cells are known as granular cells. And these cells are renal baroreceptors. They're pressure sensors, that's what they are. Here's a simple test question based upon the information up there. Where are the pressure sensors in the cardiovascular system? Your answer is the carotid bodies, the aortic arch, the afferent arteriole. The carotid bodies are measuring acute changes. They're looking at acute changes in blood pressure. The renal baroreceptors are looking more at chronic types of changes, longer duration changes. And these granular cells secrete a hormone known as renin. R-E-N-I-N. This is a hormone. So, coming back, taking a step backward, talking about the function of the kidneys, controlling blood volume, controlling the concentrations of electrolytes, controlling pH, getting rid of waste products, and then there's an endocrine function. And you guys know that from an endocrine point of view, the kidney is responsible for regulating the production of red blood cells through the secretion of erythropoietin. And now you know that the kidneys are going to play a critical role in regulating blood pressure through the action of this hormone renin. So I'm going to come along and I'm just going to put here renin. And what's renin doing? Well, within the blood, there is this protein known as angiotensinogen. Put that over here more. So at the blood level, renin is going to act on angiotensinogen and convert that into what is known as angiotensin 1. So now we've got angiotensin 1 in the blood, and it's circulating all throughout the body. And as the angiotensin 1 flows through the lungs, there are cells in the lungs that have this enzyme known as the angiotensin converting enzyme. And that is going to convert angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. So here in black arrows, if everybody will just look at the board for a moment, if we have an increase in renin, by definition, that's going to increase the concentration of angiotensin 1. Here I'm just going to put ACE, A-C-E, and let me just write down below here, get out of the way. So that stands for angio, that's good, tensin, converting, enzyme. I don't know about you, but I like that acronym ACE. It's easy. It's not a crazy thing. It's easy. Remember ACE? All right. So if we have an increased secretion in renin, that then causes an increase in angiotensin 1, which then will cause an increase in angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is going to lead to an increase in the production of aldosterone. So this is at the level of the adrenal glands. So this leads to an increase in aldosterone levels, which then leads to an increase in the number of sodium ion channels. And where is this effect happening? It's happening in the distal tubule. So here I'm just gonna put increase in the number of sodium ion channels and hopefully all of you will tell me that if we increase the number of sodium ion channels over here due to the effect of aldosterone, what's going to happen to the reabsorption of sodium? What'd you say, Kai? What's going to happen to the reabsorption of sodium?
Go down. Up.
Down, up, down, what's the answer? If I have more sodium ion channels over there, you're going to tell me the reabsorption of sodium is going to go
Up.
It will go up, that's exactly right. You're not off the hook yet. If the reabsorption of sodium goes up, then the reabsorption of what else goes up?
Water.
That's right, very good, excellent. Jamie, if the reabsorption of water goes up, what happens to blood volume?
It goes up.
It does go up, that's exactly right, excellent, very nice. Cecil, if blood volume goes up, what happens to filling pressure?
It's gonna go up.
It will go up. Mia, why do we care about filling pressure? Force, okay. Anybody else? I haven't asked you tonight, have I? You've been waiting for me to ask you. Okay, I was kind of thinking of something other than stroke volume right now. EDV, that's exactly right. Mr. Vadi, if EDV goes up, stroke volume will go up. Very good, excellent. Mr. Maka, the stroke volume goes up, what happens to cardiac output?
It goes up.
It does go up, that's right, very good. cardiac output goes up, what happens to mean arterial pressure?
Goes up.
Does go up, right? Amanda, so what is it that stimulates these granular cells to secrete renin?
Changes in pressure.
Increase in pressure or decrease in pressure?
Increase in pressure.
She said decrease in pressure, I heard her. Right, because this whole game, the effect of renin is to cause an increase in the reabsorption of water, right? That's the whole name of the game. Why would we do that? We wouldn't do that when pressure's high. We would do it when pressure's low. Yeah.
Could you repeat that? You said renin, the whole point of renin is to increase the.
So the
absorption of
question I
water.
asked is, what would cause those granular cells to secrete renin? And so the answer is a drop in pressure. A drop in mean arterial pressure. More importantly, a drop in pressure in the afferent arterial. Okay, so now, here's what we're gonna do. Here's how we're gonna finish all this up. Is that we're gonna talk about pharmacologically how we can manipulate this system over here. So, we could come along and we could use ACE inhibitors. And the two that I mentioned to you earlier are captopril and benazepril, and there are many, many others. The good news is that basically they all end with the suffix of opril. So if you saw a drug and it had this suffix, you'd sit there and your educated guess is that if it's not one of these two, it's another type of ACE inhibitor. Okay, so we've got Mrs. Jones, our 80-year-old individual. She's been to see our world-renowned cardiologist and has been treated with calcium channel blockers and beta blockers, and none of those seem to really do the trick. And so, actually, we probably should start off with a ACE inhibitor. But I'm not sure how that ACE inhibitor actually would cause a reduction in blood pressure. So to find out, we're gonna turn our attention to Mr. Liu over here. So Tim, you're up to bat. How is the use of this ACE inhibitor gonna lead to a decrease in blood pressure? As I always say, this is not a question just for Tim. This is a question for all of you. So if Mrs. Jones is hypertensive, what's gonna happen to the secretion of renin? Walk us through it.
She's hypertensive and,
You have to speak up louder so we can hear you.
sorry, I'm thinking, so if she's hypertensive, what would happen to the level of renin? That was, or,
So we have an individual who's hypertensive, Mrs. Jones. And based upon what you see up there, what's gonna happen to the secretion of renin? Are we gonna secrete more renin or less renin?
Would it go down? Go down?
We want renin levels to go down, so you're saying we're gonna secrete less renin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if that works. So in this new hypothetical, we're gonna have a decrease in renin. What's gonna happen to our angiotensin 1 levels?
Down. Down.
So that's gonna go down. What's gonna happen to angiotensin 2 levels?
Down.
What's gonna happen to aldosterone levels?
Also go down. Down.
What's gonna happen to the number of sodium ion channels over there in the distal tubule?
Also go down.
What's gonna happen to reabsorption of sodium?
Decrease.
What's gonna happen to the reabsorption of water?
Decrease.
What's gonna happen to blood volume?
If it decrease.
Pretty easy game. As long as you have everything memorized. What's gonna happen to filling pressure?
Also decrease.
What's gonna happen to EDV?
It will go down.
What's gonna happen to stroke volume?
It will go down.
Cardiac output?
Down.
Mean arterial pressure?
It'll go down.
There we go. There's our treatment for hypertension, right? That's it. Now, these sodium ion channels are out over here. And it turns out that these sodium ion channels are under the control of aldosterone. So here I'm just going to write aldosterone leads to an increase in the number of sodium ion channels. And you're all going to recognize that that is right here. So what I've written over there just applies right here. Okay, now, so that's one approach that can be used to try to manipulate diuresis. Here's another one, is that as it turns out, the sodium-potassium chloride cotransporter is affected by so-called a class of diuretics referred to as loop diuretics. And that's a good term because this class of diuretics is acting on the loop of Henle and specifically on these sodium-potassium chloride cotransporters. So here I'm going to just draw a black arrow and I'm going to write loop diuretic or loop diuretics. And I mentioned for here we could talk about furosemide. Another one is Lasix. And there are many others. So these loop diuretics, they inhibit the sodium-potassium chloride cotransporter. So we've got Mrs. Jones. We're going to come along, we're going to treat her using a loop diuretic. Stephen, how's that going to work?
So if we block,
We inhibit.
if we inhibit sodium, potassium, chloride, then we will reduce water reabsorption, which will reduce water volume,
Reduce blood volume.
blood volume, which would cause a decrease in filling pressure, a decrease in EDV, a decrease in stroke volume, a decrease in cardiac output, and a decrease in mean arterial pressure.
There you go. That's right. Very good. Very, very important class of diuretics here. Here's another class of diuretics. There's a class of diuretics that acts on cells in the distal tubule, and this class of drugs is referred to as thiazides. This class of drugs is referred to as thiazides. And the different types of thiazides, the primary one is known as hydrochloro. I'm just going to put a hyphen there and write down below thiazide. And clinically, you could refer to these as thiazides, or hydrochlorothiazide is a specific name, and hydrochlorothiazides are oftentimes simply referred to as HCT, for hydrochlorothiazides. So these basically inhibit the reabsorption of sodium at the level of the distal tubule. And then there's another set of cells within the distal tubule that can be treated. Well, let's just back up. So with a hydrochlorothiazide, hopefully all of you realize that that's going to decrease the reabsorption of sodium. And in so doing, by decreasing the reabsorption of sodium, we're just over here. You can use this same part of the scheme. So we're going to have a decrease in the reabsorption of water, which then leads to a decrease in filling pressure, well, blood volume, then acts on filling pressure, which then acts on EDV, acts on stroke volume, causes cardiac output to go down, and by acting on cardiac output and causing it to go down, we're going to have a decrease in our mean arterial pressure. And how would we even know that these types of things would happen? Well, we've got this simple little formula here, and it says that flow rate is equal to delta P over R, or alternatively, we can solve for pressure, which would be delta P is equal to flow rate times resistance. Let's see here, what else am I leaving out? Oh, yeah. Okay. So there's another class of diuretics that will act here, and these are referred to as so-called potassium-sparing diuretics. So these also cause an increase in the number of sodium ion channels, and they ensure that you're not losing potassium. Because remember, as we started out tonight, really, potassium is so critical to the excitability of cells. So you don't want to do anything that's going to cause an abnormal excretion of potassium. And one name of a drug that falls under the so-called potassium-sparing diuretics is amlodipine. A-M-L-O-D-I-P-I-N-E, amlodipine. Okay, so let's just think about this. So think about drugs for treating the heart related to blood pressure. We've got calcium channel blockers. I gave you the names of a number of those: verapamil, nifedipine, nimodipine. We got a potential strategy of acting on beta-1 adrenergic receptors by using beta blockers. And there I gave you names like propranolol, metoprolol. Did I give you another name on top of that? Enderol, thank you. Yep. So that's how we can pharmacologically manipulate the system using beta blockers. Then we could use alpha blockers. Alpha blockers are not acting on the heart, they're acting on the resistance vessels of the body, and specifically the arterioles. And the alpha blockers are blocking alpha-1 adrenergic receptors. And if you block those, then what happens to the levels of IP3 in the cell, in the smooth muscle cell?
Decrease.
They go down. And so if you have less IP3, you have less release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. There's less calcium bound to calmodulin. There's less activation of myosin light chain kinase. There's less activation of the myosin molecule. And so the smooth muscle cells relax and dilate. All right, that's kind of the cardiovascular side of the equation, so to speak. And now we can get into the renal side of the equation. So on the renal side, well, before I talk renal, we've got the ACE inhibitors. That's acting at the level of the lungs. That's a diuretic. Now we can talk about the kidney. So we've got loop diuretics, we've got the thiazides, and we've got potassium-sparing drugs like amlodipine. And there are others. For instance, there are others that are basically regulators of osmosis. I'm not going to get into that, but those, you guys got enough of drugs, at least to get you thinking about it.
Professor,
Yes, go for it.
can you post the correct answers for the homework? Can you post the correct answers for the homework?
We're going to go upstairs. You can hear the answers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good spot to end right there. So, you know, for me, it's a true pleasure to come here every semester. And my daughter's a teacher, and she struggles at times because she's working with 6th and 7th graders. The beauty of teaching at this level is that for the most part, everybody's highly motivated. And so that makes it fun and a blast to come here. I almost wish I could put her in my seat, and I think she would enjoy teaching a lot more. She does enjoy teaching, but at times it can be trying. And also, I want to try to just come back to what I started out with in this class, and that is life is a miracle. And I hope many of you have already learned this in courses that you've taken at other schools and even here in terms of the complexity of life. But I hope that this course has kind of peeled away, if you will, a little bit of the skin, so to speak, and help convince you that, man, the balance of life is phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And independent of anything that I'm going to say after this, all of you hopefully appreciate that, and that's why you're going into the fields of healthcare that you've chosen. But imagine that if you knew that there were no other forms of life anywhere out there in the cosmos, and we were it. Wow, that's mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing, period, that we've evolved to the levels that we're at, and we understand so much of the physical and the chemical world. So with that, it's been a blast to come here every night. Hopefully that's come across. I had a lot of fun with you guys, a lot of great students in here. Don't be bashful reaching out to me in the future for letters of rec. I'm more than happy to do that for any one of you. And with that, we're done. Now, for those of you interested, we're going to go upstairs. We're going to cover some of the things I talked about earlier related to pressure volume diagrams and the homework assignments, and making sure you understand how to calculate oxygen uptake at the mouth level and how you can use the Fick principle to calculate oxygen uptake at the tissue level. All right, so with that, thank you kindly. Like I said, it's been a blast. For those of you who show upstairs, we'll keep the story going.
Professor.
Thank you.